of the UAE's deep and long-standing commitment to supporting the WPS agenda. That's a commitment that we hope to make front and center, like many other countries, of our foreign policy platform. But for us, it's important to move from lip service to reality, especially as the UAE seeks a seat on the UN Security Council for 2022-23. When Ambassador Milan and her great team and ourselves planned this series, everyone was eagerly counting down towards both the 25th anniversary of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action and the 20th anniversary of UN Security Council Resolution 1325. And little did we know back then that only a few months later, the entire world would be gripped by a global pandemic. Already, early on, facing the crisis caused by COVID-19 in these past months, we've seen spikes in sexual and gender-based violence around the world. But at the same time, the crisis has reaffirmed once more women's and girls' critical role in regard to response and recovery. It's absolutely crystal clear that we can no longer afford to exclude women and girls from decision-making processes. But it will require collective action to advance their full, equal, and meaningful participation, especially in post-conflict reconstruction. And it's still not happening in countless places around the world. The period after conflict, as we know, is a window of opportunity to build back better, to accelerate gender equality, advance women's empowerment, and promote meaningful participation. Throughout this past year, we have assembled the best-in-class experts for this series, taking a closer look at women's political participation, women's roles in economic recovery and climate resilience, their access to justice in post-conflict reconstruction, and the importance of gender-responsive security sector reform. Our discussions reaffirm that women are pivotal to establishing reconstruction processes that lead to more durable stability and peace. When we recently observed the 2 anniversaries of the great milestones for women's inclusion within the UN, everyone agreed that yes, impressive strides have been made in empowering women over the past 25 years. However, we also concluded, once again, that there is considerable scope for improvement in actually enabling women's engagement in making the implementation happen. And this was precisely the rationale behind our collaboration for these panel series. Understanding the gaps and barriers to then provide the practical recommendations on implementation for governments around the world. So today, the Georgetown Institute and the UAE are proud to present the 2 concrete outcomes of this series. First, the Joint Research Report, which highlights the major conclusions and recommendations from all 4 panel discussions, as well as underlying research findings to advance and implement inclusive approaches to engaging in post-conflict settings. And second, the UN Action Plan identifying concrete actions and reforms that member states and UN agencies can undertake to ensure post-conflict activities are gender mainstreamed. We would like to see, in simple terms, countries really commit to these action plans. The speeches might be easy, but we also need to start walking the talk. It is now my great pleasure to share with you a message from our keynote speaker, Secretary Hillary Rodham Clinton, Honorary Founding Chair of the Georgetown Institute for Women, Peace and Security. As I mentioned at the outset, it is a great honor to have someone who in fact needs no introduction, as she has always been at the forefront of advocating for women's leading roles in peace and security, not only at home, but around the world. We're so honored to have her contribute to our discussion today. Secretary Clinton has always had a powerful voice for advancing progress for women, and she also launched the first US National Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security. A few years back, in her remarks at the Women in the World Summit in 2013, she said, "I have always believed that women are not victims. We are agents of change. We are drivers of progress. We are makers of peace. All we need is a fighting chance." Thank you, and welcome, Secretary Clinton.
Thank you, Ambassador Nusabeh, and thank you all for being here. 25 years ago, the world came together in Beijing to say with one voice that human rights are women's rights and women's rights are human rights once and for all. Out of that conference came the Platform for Action, with representatives from all 189 nations present, committed to the full and equal participation of women in political, civic, economic, social, and cultural life. The platform laid the groundwork for sweeping, necessary changes, including the adoption of UN Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace, and security. In the years that's followed, we've gathered data and built literally Everests of evidence to support what we knew in our hearts all along, that when women are healthier and more economically secure, families, communities, and entire nations are better off. When women and girls participate in democracy, the benefits ripple out across society. And when women are included at the peace table, agreements are more likely to be reached and more likely to last. Now, as we celebrate the 20th anniversary of Resolution 1325, we're diving into some of that data. Today's report, commissioned by the Permanent Mission of the United Arab Emirates and written by the Georgetown Institute for Women, Peace, and Security, focuses on an important and timely topic. Around the globe, we know that the period after conflict is a window of opportunity, not only to determine whether or not violence will recur, but to address deep-seated inequalities, including gender inequality. It's also a crucial moment to secure women's meaningful participation at every stage of relief and recovery. Resolution 1325 recognizes, and research shows, that including women in reconstruction efforts is critical to long-term peace, stability, and development. Yet we also know too often women are still sidelined, and post-conflict reconstruction processes frequently lack any gender perspective and fail to achieve sustainable peace. I've said for a long time, and believe more fiercely than ever today, that expanding women's rights, opportunities, and full participation is the great unfinished business of the 21st century. Finishing it once and for all has taken on new urgency in recent months as the COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated some of the most insidious and pervasive inequalities women face. We're seeing spikes in sexual and gender-based violence around the world, especially in conflict and post-conflict settings where women are already vulnerable to violence. At the same time, in the midst of a global health and economic crisis, we're seeing the extraordinary strength of women as peace builders, leaders, and decision makers. For too long, the role of women in post-conflict reconstruction has been an understudied aspect of efforts to advance peace and security. With this report, that is finally beginning to change. With the research and recommendations in these pages, the expertise of all who contributed, and the leadership of everyone gathered today, there is no doubt in my mind that we can seize this moment to build a more peaceful and stable world where it is universally recognized that women and girls are not only survivors of conflict, but agents of change. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Secretary Clinton. But also your endless and tireless efforts in breaking the many barriers that women and girls face all over the world. I will now hand over to my dear friend, Ambassador Milan Verveer, to share with us the main findings of the panel discussions. She'll be joined by Agathe Christian, a Hillary Rodham Clinton Research Fellow, in presenting the GIWPS UAE Joint Report and Action Plan on advancing women's participation in post-conflict reconstruction. Milan, it has been such a pleasure collaborating with you for this initiative, as always. Thank you for your guidance throughout all of these panel discussions in the past year and your great work in continuously highlighting to us here in New York and around the world the importance of advancing the WPS agenda.
Well, thank you so much, Ambassador Nusebe, and it is always a distinct pleasure to be with you, and I want to extend our thanks for your ongoing committed leadership, and today particularly for your collaboration on this joint initiative. We are truly pleased to be here together to launch this report to advance progress on a critically important, but I dare to say, an often under-recognized topic: women's participation in post-conflict reconstruction. We know that their participation in relief and recovery is embedded in Security Council Resolution 1325. It is indeed the fourth pillar, but women's full and meaningful participation is still too often sidelined, and we pay a price for that, they're being sidelined in ensuring effective movement and transition to sustainable peace. Over the past year, through a series of collaborative UN virtual events and extensive research, we examined 4 critical areas through the application of a gender lens: post-conflict governance, economic recovery, security sector reform, and access to justice for women. The process also included identifying barriers and the best practices for overcoming them. Today, we are launching this joint report for the UN Action Plan, which is a roadmap for more effective peace building, particularly as we mark this 20th anniversary of Security Council Resolution 1325 and the Secretary General's 2020 review. So I'm going to turn now to my colleague, Gath Christian, the lead author of this report, to share with us at the outset the first area of focus.
Thank you very much, Melen. Well, the transition from violent conflict to post-conflict reconstruction is a critical period for ensuring women's meaningful engagement in political institutions and decision-making. However, progress in these areas has been slow and uneven, and women remain underrepresented as lawmakers and political leaders at all levels. In transitions from violent conflict, we found that the constitution-making process is a major entry point for women's participation in post-conflict governance and to establish the legal framework to build inclusive institutions. Why is it a major entry point? Well, between 1990 and 2015, 75 countries reformed their constitution after violent conflict, unrest, or regime change. And from technical experts to constitution drafters, women participated in constitution-making bodies at a rate that rose from an average of 13% in the 1990s to 24% between 2002 and 2015. Experience from various post-conflict contexts offers several lessons for enhancing women's participation in constitution-making processes and post-conflict governance more broadly. First, evidence from the Philippines and Tunisia show that involving women early on in the transition and early mobilization from women's groups help them access constitution-making bodies, transition commissions, and other post-conflict governance bodies. Then adopting explicit mechanisms for women's inclusion like quotas help as well. For example, in post-conflict countries with legislated quotas, the share of women in parliament is more than twice than in post-conflict countries without such quotas, about 24% compared to 11%. However, women in politics still face major barriers, and that can be intensified in post-conflict countries, such as gender discrimination and adverse norms, political parties being gatekeepers and being largely male-dominated and refusing change, and also violence against women in politics. So strategies to overcome some of these barriers include supporting structural reforms at all levels of governance, and especially in local governance and decentralization processes. and also reforming political parties by eliminating regulations that discriminate against women and developing inclusion mechanisms and providing specific resources for women candidates to run for office through capacity building training and mentoring programs. So confronting these barriers and leveraging the constitution-making process is critical to accelerate progress toward gender equality and women's political participation more broadly. Now I turn it over to Mélène to share recommendations on how to foster women's inclusion and environmental sustainability in economic recovery.
Another important element in ensuring sustainable peace is indeed economic recovery. And for that, women's inclusion and environmental sustainability are absolutely essential. Evidence from several countries shows that the post-conflict period presents opportunities for women to take on new roles in the economy. We've also seen that where women are more empowered, the economic recovery is more rapid and poverty is more quickly reduced. Women must also be engaged as planners, decision makers, and implementers in all segments of the post-conflict economy. Surely half the population and its talents and experiences should not be left out of these critical decisions. Among the key recommendations are first, to promote women-led businesses to boost economic growth and create jobs, as well as to address barriers to women's entrepreneurship. This is often given short shrift in these decisions about economic revitalization. Even in the face of solid data, we must work to change that. Second, to advance gender-responsive legal reforms that play a pivotal role in women's economic well-being. These include property ownership, land rights, and inheritance. For example, in Guinea, women are more than half of the agricultural force, and this is true in comparable countries, but only 5% of the landowners. The FAO estimates that if women farmers had the same land rights as male farmers, they could produce 20 to 30% more food and reduce the number of malnourished by up to 17%. Third, we need to harness public-private partnerships and ensure women's participation in government procurement and other policies where they are often left out. Fourth, we need to consult with women in economic decision-making and community control of planning and resources. Post-conflict states and development partners should set a requirement that women constitute 50% of consultation participants about economic recovery. Lastly, in this context, let me mention climate change, which needs to be a central consideration. Women in fragile and conflict-affected contexts often work in climate-vulnerable sectors and have fewer resources to cope with environmental disasters than men. 4 in 5 women who are in paid work in post-conflict countries work in agriculture. Investing in women's capacity and expertise in climate-smart agriculture and clean energy provides important dividends. In Liberia, for example, women were trained on building, installing, and maintaining solar lamps and panels to address the lack of electricity in the rural areas. Also important is leveraging women's skills in natural and resource management. In Nepal, for example, women's indigenous knowledge and skills in natural resource management have decreased the less resources related to conflicts at the local level. Lastly, we need to set benchmarks and indicators to ensure that gender and climate sensitive budgeting and planning take place in post-conflict decisions on investments and assistance. Back to Agath for our third area.
In the aftermath of violent conflict, security sector reform is urgent to reestablish safety and security, restore the rule of law, and build trust between security providers and local populations. What we mean by security sector reform, or SSR, is the political and technical process of improving state and human security by making security provision, management, and oversight more effective and accountable. And this process is interlinked with the disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration process, which bring former combatants into civilian life and often into the new security institutions. So post-conflict security sector reform brings new opportunities to create more inclusive security institutions and to address the different security and justice needs of both women and men. Now, why is increasing women's participation in the security sector important? Well, they can contribute to greater operational effectiveness, accountability, and local ownership. They can also bring attention to issues of conflict-related sexual violence and gender-based violence. And examples from the Democratic Republic of Congo and Sierra Leone showed that women victims of such abuse were more likely to report incidents to a female officer than to a male officer. However, major barriers to women's participation in the security sector remain, and we recommend doing gender-sensitive assessments to identify the political, cultural, and institutional factors that inhibit women's inclusion in the security sector. And that should be performed as part of national security policies and peace agreements implementation. Other good practices include adopting gender quota targets of at least 30%, but with the goal of reaching parity, and appoint and mentor women in high-level defense and security positions, and develop policies to address gender-based discrimination. Another important point in the report is to enhance the effectiveness and predictability of UN support by providing dedicated funding, monitoring, and reporting to address the lack of resources made available to adopt a gender lens in security sector reform. And resources are needed to achieve the Secretary General's 15% target for peace and security funds that explicitly promote gender equality. Lastly, it's important to build trust between security providers and local communities, because after violent conflict, there's huge local distrust in security sector institutions that arise from atrocities perpetrated during conflict. And that's a major issue to address in security sector reform. So fostering local ownership and building trust between security providers and local populations, and involving women's civil society organizations in that process is critical. Priority actions include community policing, dialogue, and accountability measures. And the UN and member states can help strengthen that by making commitments to develop gender-sensitive community policing plans, for example. Engaging male allies in that process is also very important to foster gender equality. And male officers and senior military staff should receive mandatory training on gender issues and codes of conduct. Strategies that promote capacity development and greater awareness of gender issues in the security sector through coaching and mentoring programs for military staff can also help advance gender equality. So to sum up, these strategies contribute to restoring the rule of law and go hand in hand with advancing justice for women post-conflict. And I'm turning it over to Mélène.
Thank you, Agath. And it is critically important to advance justice for women post-conflict. In this transition period, countries can address the underlying inequalities, gender-based discrimination, as well as injustices experienced by women during the conflict. This can happen through the writing of new constitutions, through legislative reforms, and institution building that will be taking place. For example, in Burundi, Rwanda, and Sierra Leone, officials were able to enact more just laws and build more equitable institutions, and women rose to the highest judicial position in the immediate post-conflict period as a result. As we know, conflicts make it difficult for women to access basic services and justice. Many women continue to face threats of insecurity, injustice, and violence during this period. As we all know, globally, the UN estimates that 1 in 3 women will experience sexual or gender-based violence, with rates sometimes as twice as high in the fragile settings and these periods. So our research identified 3 priority areas for action. First, reconstruction efforts at all levels must prevent and respond to violence against women and ensure access to justice and law enforcement institutions. Transitional justice mechanisms are informed by gender expertise. Repealing discriminatory laws and introducing gender-responsive legal reforms are also necessary. The UN and member states should commit to safeguarding budgets for protection, including in peacekeeping missions, as well as to commit to reporting requirements for sexual and gender-based violence. Protection is all important. Secondly, the UN and development partners, as well as states, should support and validate the collective action of women grassroots justice actors who create trust and establish channels of communication with survivors. This, of course, also means funding and physical meeting spaces. Third, it's also important to appoint and fund gender advisors, as well as mandate a 50% quota for women in truth commissions, reparations programs, and other post-conflict justice mechanisms that are so critical to building a better future in the post-conflict societies. So those are the 4 areas and recommendations. Let me turn back to Agath for a final word on how to move forward on these recommendations.
The way forward. Well, taking this agenda forward will require strong commitment and strong coordination between all stakeholders, from the UN, member states, donors, civil society, and the private sector. We hope that this report and action plan can help the UN, post-conflict states, and development partners make concrete commitments to adopt a gender perspective and advance women's participation in post-conflict reconstruction. And that's especially urgent during the COVID pandemic, which has exacerbated vulnerabilities, and especially in conflict and post-conflict context. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Agath. I think it's also important that we be mindful, as you just said, that COVID has disproportionately affected women, and its terrible consequences have so exacerbated the situation in fragile and post-conflict settings. We're all aware of what we're dealing with in settings that aren't so terribly optimal as they are for the rest of us. In this context, these recommendations take on an even greater importance. If we are to accelerate progress on 1325, we truly must pay greater attention to the 4th pillar, women's participation in relief, recovery, and reconstruction post-conflict. A commitment to greater progress in this area would be a truly fitting way to mark this important 20th anniversary. But even more important, it would be the most fitting thing we could do to advance sustainable peace, stability, and opportunity in societies going through this critical transition period from war to peace. So much hangs on this transition. We now have to rely on stakeholders, whether they are the member states, the UN itself, development agencies, civil society, peace builders on the ground. And so it is a call to all of us to go forward. The report itself is available on our website. You can find the link to it in your chat box. And now let me turn to our interventions. I see we have the ambassador from Canada, Ambassador Ray, permanent representative of Canada to the UN.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. It's good to be with you, and it's good to have had the opportunity to listen to the presentations. I want to thank the Georgetown Institute for Women, Peace and Security, as well as the permanent mission of the UAE for organizing this event, which is the culmination of a year of hard work and mobilization on the part of teams and leaders. And I'm really pleased to congratulate not only you, Ambassador Verveer, but also my colleague, Ambassador Lana Nseba. Perhaps I could just start with a personal word, and that is that I had the honor to lead a feminist government 30 years ago in the province of Ontario, which is Canada's largest province. And it may seem like a moment in either political self-congratulations or parochialism to talk about that experience. But the reason that I do so is to simply point out that a number of the approaches, initiatives, and battles that we're fighting on the global level, we were fighting very much on the local level in the province of Ontario in Canada 30 years ago. Equality for women in terms of equal pay, dealing with family violence and the consequences of that, dealing with the need for shelter, for housing, but above all, dealing with the need for a feminist lens, for an approach that is firmly based on the principle that women face systemic discrimination, and that this discrimination has not ended in advanced economies any more than it has ended in any other part of the world. And I also say it for this reason, and that is that sometimes in my new role as ambassador to the UN, I find in my discussions with many colleagues who find that there's an element in which the Western countries are seen as preaching, and we're seen as talking down. And I want to just make the point to say, we're not talking down, we're talking to ourselves. We're looking in the mirror. And we're recognizing that the challenges that we face globally, we also face locally. And none of us comes into these discussions with perfectly clean hands, or with an ability to say, you know, we want to help you deal with, quote, your problems. These are our problems. We face them on a daily basis at home, and we face them globally. I think it's important for me to say that at the outset, because I really think it's critical for us to embrace the women, peace, and security agenda. And it's also important for us to recognize that's an agenda that applies to us at home as much as it applies in the work that we do while engaging with the rest of the world. I'm delighted to take part in the launch of this action plan. I think it's critically important because it provides us with really very, very clear guidance on advancing efforts for reconstruction that are inclusive. And we're really talking about doing something which we're all doing at home, which is mainstreaming gender across the UN's post-conflict services and activities, as well as ensuring meaningful participation as decision makers, implementers, and beneficiaries of post-conflict reconstruction. As I've said, these are issues that are important to us at home. They apply to how we do policing. They apply to what efforts are we making to transform policing across our vast country. And they're also especially important during the 20th anniversary year of Resolution 1325. I want to focus on two main points, in addition to the ones that have been pointed out by so many, Secretary Clinton and Agathe Christian, whose interventions have been very, very helpful in allowing us to focus on the critical issues. The first one is the issue of sustainable and predictable financial support. Some of you who are on this call may have heard me say before, but I will say it again, that to talk about strategy without talking about money would be better called hallucination. We frequently talk, I'm glad you got it, Ambassador, because it's very important for us to remember this. We can have all the strategies we want. If we don't have the sustainable support that we need, we're not making progress and we're just dreaming. I'm proud to say that Canada has begun to get the message. We've increased our financial contributions, including the Women's Peace and Humanitarian Fund and the Equality Fund Initiative, which is a first of its kind global platform that brings together government, philanthropic, private sector, civil society actors to create a sustainable source of funding for women's organizations and movements for years to come. And we are committed to continuing that effort. Affirmative action for funding. We also need to do more. That's why on the 20th anniversary of 1325, we launched a number of new initiatives, including a dedicated funding envelope focused on women peace builders, with an emphasis on supporting efforts at the grassroots level. In my early days here, I've had many discussions with our peace building group and our peacekeeping group. And we're looking hard at how can we meet the targets and how can we meet the quotas. The fact is our quotas should be more ambitious, not less ambitious. And we have a lot of work to do at home to make sure that we are doing everything we can to get women on the ground who are doing the work. And when people say, well, women can do this, but they can't do that, our government just says no. In our view, as far as the defense forces are concerned, as far as police are concerned, women can do it all. And there's no place that's set aside for women. Women have a right and a responsibility to be able to participate equally at every level of the peace building initiative. And my second point is just to say that as the outgoing chair of the Peace Building Commission, I feel like a bit of a revolving door. I was ingoing at the end of August, and now I'm outgoing at the end of January. But I will still be around and looking at what more we need to do on peace building. But we've been very clear in our term in office to say that we have to do everything possible to ensure the full participation of women in everything that the peace building effort does for the United Nations. We have a clear gender strategy, and we've done much to promote gender responsive peace building. But we have to do more, engaging with women leaders and peace builders, to strengthening our gender analysis, to inform PBC decision-making, to enhance advocacy on gender responsive peace building efforts across the UN system and all the other multilateral organizations. I'm confident that your report is going to be more than just food for thought. It's going to help to drive the agenda and help to push us to make the kind of progress that we really have to make. So I want to thank you again for this wonderful initiative. We look forward to engaging with the action plan in greater detail as time unfolds. But I want you to know you have a friend in Canada, you have an advocate in Canada, and you have an advocate and a friend in me. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Ambassador Ray, and thank you for reminding us about the comprehensive understanding of security, that the global is local, and for accentuating resources as well. I want to move now to Ambassador Geraldine Byrne-Nason, the Perm Rep of Ireland to the United Nations, and an excellent colleague on these issues as well.
Thank you very much indeed, dear Ambassador Milan and Secretary of State, colleagues in Georgetown. Great to be with you, dear Lana. We've engaged with you all along the way in this series. I'll tell you with sincere interest, but full intent. And that's almost a declaration in itself. Frankly, we see the work you've been doing through this series as invaluable to what we're planning as Ireland to do as we step up in just 6 weeks' time to that horseshoe table across the road here at the UN to sit at the Security Council. We want to champion this agenda, and I can't wait to see Lana join us there in a year where we will really bring the firepower we've built up through your work here. I know time is limited, so I'm going to focus just on 2 points. The first is on the research piece, and the second then just to mention the question of the nature and the challenge of the post-conflict reconstruction. Look, on research, I've said to you, this is invaluable work you've done. I think the Secretary of State brought it out in her own introduction. Conviction and political will, we know, as she said herself, we know in our hearts what this means. Frankly, we also know now it's not enough. And I think that we absolutely know that to finish this job, we need the evidence-based, the factual, hard, concrete weight of argument to come to the table. That's why we recently here in New York worked with the network of women peace builders, the global network of women peace builders. We did some research on that with UN Women also, learning from them basically what the issues are on the ground. And there are facts that emerge from these conversations We need to bring those into the sometimes very macro discussions that we allow ourselves to have on these issues. We're going to tie the findings of the work you have done, the work we have done here in New York, to bring that evidence-based approach to what we will do at the Security Council. Secretary of State made the point that it's not enough because we see ourselves being sidelined. And from our point of view, evidence and facts play a role, as we know, more globally even today, in finishing off a job. The second point on the challenge of the nature of post-conflict reconstruction, it sounds cliche to all of us on this call today, a quarter of a century after that moment when the Secretary of State stood up in Beijing, that we're still having the same conversations, knowing we're not where we need to be, and knowing, frankly, that building back from conflict in itself, none of this is a one-dimensional process. It has to be holistic. And I think your research brings that point through in that the complex nature, whether we're looking at environmental, economic sustainability, ensuring peace and security in sync with the work we do more globally, but also, frankly, and I will come back to this again and again, that we need to bring all this back to rooted in human rights and justice, and that women's full and equal participation in that sentence is impossible unless we make it a requirement and not a recommendation. So I'll finish off saying that, you know, as an Irish woman, clearly I have seen this work. I have seen in a post-conflict environment in Northern Ireland how the work of women at that peace negotiation table, where they included provisions in the Good Friday Agreement, and I'll just list them 5, equal opportunity, women's rights to equal political participation, social inclusion, reconciliation, needs of victims, integrated education and mixed housing. That's a menu in itself. That agreement is proof positive that this post-conflict reconstruction doesn't end when the ink is dry on those agreements. It actually continues. And by addressing those root causes that I've just listed there, we've seen no accident, in my view, that today Northern Ireland, the 2 political leaders in Northern Ireland, the First Minister, Deputy First Minister, 2 women, not accidental in my view. So just to finish off, Ambassador, to say to you, we're all in. Lana knows that. We're there in a role laying the groundwork as we do for the next year ahead, but deeply appreciative for everything you and your colleagues in Georgetown have brought to this. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Ambassador Nason. And I'm glad you raised the example of Northern Ireland and that peace process, because we often use it as an evidence-based case of how critical women's participation is. So we look forward to your continued leadership. I'm going to turn now to Ambassador Mona Jewell, Norway's permanent representative to the UN and a great colleague on 1325 as well. Ambassador Jewell.
Thank you so much, Ambassador, and thank you and your colleagues at the Georgetown Institute for this remarkable report, and also a big thanks to Lana, our good friend in New York, for being part of this and organizing this event. I'm really very honored to be here today for the launch of this excellent report. We entirely agree that women's full, equal, and meaningful participation should be the guiding principle in every phase and in all aspects of our peace and security work. Norway, as you know, and also based on our experience from peace process around the world, is committed, also as a council member, to retain the same focus on women's participation and rights from the negotiation phase right through implementation and the post-conflict phase. This means we support the parties and civil society's efforts to ensure women's representation in areas of security, sector reform, transitional justice, and peace monitoring. We highlight women's roles and the gender perspective in all aspects of the DDR. and also their role in de-radicalization and in promoting resilience. Recognition and support, both inside the Security Council and outside, is a Norwegian priority. We must recognize the work of women's grassroots organizations in building and upholding the trust in local communities' capabilities, especially through answering immediate needs. The trusted role they play gives them the leverage and lay the foundation for peace and stability. So once again, very grateful to be able to be here today, and we will really take every single word in your report to our mind and bring it with us in the future work. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Ambassador, and thank you for raising all those key points. And we will look forward to Norway's continuing leadership on 1325. I'm going to turn now to Ambassador Jonathan Allen, the chargé from the UK to the United Nations. Ambassador Allen.
Thank you very much, and thanks to everybody else as well. And I saw Lana earlier, and thanks to her for organising, or for her support in organising this today. I'm going to start with a little bit of agreement. I'm going to start by agreeing with Bob in particular, Bob Ray, that these points are universal. These issues are universal. They apply in our own countries as much as they apply around the world. And I completely agree with his point about the fact that we speak into the mirror when we talk about these. None of us are complacent. And we know this is an agenda around building a future for all of us, actually. And I think in that context, I want to really reinforce and underline Geraldine's comments about Northern Ireland. One of the most profound changes, one of the most profound events in recent history for our two countries. And our two countries go from strength to strength on the back of the relationship that is forged through that ended conflict. So a couple of comments, if I might, from my own personal perspective, having been engaged in this struggle now for some time here in New York. And I think we have to be honest that right now the Security Council is not a particularly conducive environment. There are two countries in the Council who are opposed to this agenda, opposed not only to taking it forward, but opposed even to reiterating where it stands at the moment. One of those countries even opposes references to conflict-related sexual violence in Security Council resolutions on different geographic topics, which is surprising and sad. So I think actually my message would be, well, let's step away. Let's celebrate what we achieved through the Council 20 years ago and in the 10 resolutions that we've got through. But let's stop attempts to get new normative frameworks through the Council for a while. We've got what we need actually for now. It's good enough for now. So I think we should be moving into making it a reality. We know that the WPS agenda is the right thing to do in and of itself. We also know the theory, and others, the presentation, Agatha talked about the fact that when women meaningfully participate in peace processes, the resulting agreement is 64% less likely to fail and 35% more likely to last at least 15 years. And that's not only because of the role of women, but that is because that would mean normally that those peace processes are generally more inclusive of divergent views and groups of opinion. After all, if you cannot include the views of 50% of your population, how are you going to be including the views of genuine minorities? So we have the theory, so let's make it a reality. And I think, frankly, I would say the United Nations have the manual. It's about implementing all of this now. That means that UN agencies, funds and programs looking hard at what they're doing, but not only as individuals, not even as a collective development system, but coming together with the Department for Peacekeeping Operations, the Peace Operations, the Department for Political and Peacebuilding Affairs, coming together as one United Nations, working in different contexts, responding to the needs of that context, not applying a one-size-fits-all approach, and then getting on and doing it. And I think that's where we should be focusing our efforts. And all of us member states have got the opportunity, I think, to expect and demand that of our UN friends. The last point I would make, again, reflecting on something Bob said, but those who oppose gender equality and the women, peace and security agenda in the Security Council publicly also, out of the light of publicity, work to defund it in the Fifth Committee of the United Nations, the committee that sets the budget. And I just look to all those representatives of member states here. Here's one thing everybody can do. Task your delegate to the Fifth Committee to stand up for all the resources that we need to devote it to the different areas of the regular budget and the peacekeeping budget to ensure that this agenda is properly funded. Don't let people defund it in the dark. Thank you.
Well, thank you, and for reminding us of something I think we all agree, which is we've got to do the job of implementation. We've got quite a few resolutions and the wording is perfect. It's time to get on with the job. So thank you for that, Ambassador. And now to Ambassador Andres Regueles, the Deputy Perm Rep of Colombia to the United Nations.
Well,
Ambassador.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank you for the invitation to this event on women's participation in post-conflict reconstruction that is co-hosted by the Permanent Mission of the United Arab Emirates to the UN and the Georgetown Institute for Women, Peace and Security. And I would like to begin by highlighting the importance that the issues of women, peace and security have for the government of Colombia. We do believe that the Security Council Resolution 1325 provides an opportunity to reiterate political commitment, consider concrete actions, and scale up investment in gender equality. My country has been an example in the implementation of this resolution. There is no doubt that political and economic empowerment and the promotion of women leadership are essential for the achievement of a peaceful and inclusive society based on the principles of legality, entrepreneurship, and equity. We are convinced that the participation of women in peace building is a priority. It contributes not only to achieving the transformations that the Peace with Legality policy proposes, but also to offering females, particularly in the rural areas, conditions to help them achieve their economic autonomy and a better life. It facilitates the generation of workspaces in decent conditions that break with the cycles of violence that violate their rights. Madam Chair, after the signing of the 2016 Peace Accord, which was recognized by the Secretary General as one of the most gender-inclusive agreements, the plan for implementation in Colombia includes more than 500 indicators. 51 are related to gender approach policies. The aforementioned indicators are aligned with the 4 pillars of Resolution 1325. The initiatives that we are promoting are aimed at benefiting women in key areas such as rural property, infrastructure, land projects, quality of health, and access and quality of education. Today, the main challenge that remains for the participation of women in peace-building scenarios is in terms of security. And let me be clear on this. Actions by illegal armed groups and actors related to drug trafficking and illegal economies, such as mining, hinder their participation in the construction and consolidation of peace. Particularly, it affects their process of reincorporation, as well as those who are part of the National Comprehensive Program of Illicit Crops Substitution. The government of Colombia has an unwavering commitment to promote women's leadership and their participation in different political scenarios. In fact, for the first time, we have a female vice president, Marta Lucía Ramírez. This government has the first joint cabinet in the history of Colombia. And for the first time, our National Development Plan includes a special chapter dedicated to women's equity. Madam Chair, I would like to conclude by reiterating that the WPS agenda is a priority for my government. Women are making an enormous contribution to the peace-building process in Colombia. They are working very hard to construct a more prosperous nation. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Mr. Ambassador. And I think of all of us, your country is so intimately involved and engaged, as you pointed out, in really executing what we're all talking about, having gone from a very inclusive peace process to now implementing the relief, the recovery, and everything that comes with that implementation. So thank you for that. Thanks to each of you. And now to our leader, back to Ambassador Nsebe, and for your final words, Lana.
Thank you, Milan. Thank you, Agath, for sharing such an excellent overview of the panel series and its outcomes with us. And thank you to all the fantastic interventions as well. I think we have a blueprint before us. Council members have spoken and reiterated that they're going to use these points in their work at the council, and there's still much work to be done, Milan, as you yourself have highlighted. So I'd like to thank everyone for their valuable contributions to this discussion and for their commitment stated in this session to the findings of this joint report. And as member states and the UN and civil society have established time and again, especially during this groundbreaking year for gender equality and the WPS agenda, and as Milan has said throughout this session, implementation of the normative frameworks for women's meaningful participation is the key work ahead of us today if we want to deliver on these commitments made throughout this past decade and more. And at the same time, we need to guarantee the gains that were made, as Jonathan has pointed out, ambassador from the UK, so that we don't get lost on our way to this and actually lose ground. And I think that message is a very powerful one for us to take forward. I'm so grateful that so many of us have come here together today. I can see the numbers, and several hundreds have participated. We'll of course be sharing this research report and the action plan with all the permanent missions. We'll call on all of our fellow WPS champions to endorse and sign on to this action plan to put their commitment on paper. And I just ask again, like Milan, that we all jointly redouble our efforts in enhancing women's inclusion in these post-conflict settings by creating action plans that are achievable, implementable, and measurable, so that we can create these more peaceful and stable societies all over the world that the people deserve and have access to. And thank you once again.